Well, Corey, I appreciate you being here with me on the Social Entrepreneurship and Innovation podcast. For folks who are unfamiliar with you and the work that you do, would you mind briefly providing us with a little introduction?
Yeah, thank you. I'm super glad to be here. It's the Two Corey podcast today.
That's right.
So my name is Corey Kohn, and I lead a small worker-owned tech agency in Boulder, Colorado. We build custom software for clients. We've been a B Corp for a long time now, definitely over 5 years, a bit longer, maybe 7 years, something like that. We focus particularly on software that we think supports social and environmental justice, but we're really primarily focused on making meaningful work for the people we work with, our colleagues, software developers and designers. And that gives you a pretty simple lay of the land.
Well, there's definitely a lot in there that I know we'll dive into in this conversation, but I'd like to start maybe at a place that could surprise you, but your background was so eclectic in what I was picking up from some of the biographical details. I'm curious first, what influence do you think being raised in a Buddhist family has on the work that you do, and as well how you do the work that you do?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I'm not sure I have a really good answer, but it definitely influences my worldview, and that's my work and my relationships and my network and all of that kind of thing. So I think one way that it influences the way way I run Dojo4, and then what we're going to be talking about in a little while, Antidote to Tech, is thinking about or having a relationship with embodiment and mindfulness, and kind of how we are in the world with each other, with ourselves, that kind of thing. And, we're based in Boulder, Colorado, which is the home of Naropa University, and kind of known for, since around the time I was born in the 70s, as being a place where people come to study meditation and that kind of thing. So it's not, people aren't kind of thrown off by that kind of approach here in Boulder. And I think we're not really front and center about any of that, but it's definitely ingrained in the way we do our work. It's for me, and then also I think for my colleagues, those of us who have found each other and, have enjoyed working with each other for years and years, is that, kindness, for instance, is just it's the foundation of how we do business. We absolutely must feel like we're in genuinely respectful, kind relationships with our clients, with our coworkers, with our competition, even all that kind of thing, in order to feel like we're doing our best work. And I think, that definitely threads back to some of my Buddhist upbringing around things like compassion and, mindfulness of others and our own environmental states and that kind of thing. And I think then, it also relates, I really pushed this company early on to move towards being a B Corp. And I'd say you can have any kind of worldview and want to do good in the world with your business. Absolutely, no question. But I think, in Buddhism, there's a, basic acknowledgement of impermanence, which is things are changing all the time. And the good times, one way that you could see that in business is the good times don't always last, right? The bad times don't always last. So I really had this feeling I really want to focus on acknowledging that, money doesn't make you happy, for instance, that changes too. And that if we're going to do our best work, we have to do that in an environment of kindness. And that really ties in then to kind of the B Corp ethos of using business as a force for good. Does that answer your question at all?
I think so. It's funny to me that you say it's not so front and center, maybe at least from perhaps your relationship locally in the community in Boulder. But just as I was just reading the text on y'all's site, Dojo4, and as well the initiative we'll talk about, Antidote to Tech, I noticed myself feel better. Like I felt happier, just the language that you use and what I felt that emphasized. And it was certainly something that seemed different to me, just of maybe what my immediate or almost instantaneous connotations are with tech, I suppose, in the industry as a whole. And I was interested too, just as well, I noticed you had a number of degrees from Canadian universities. That's maybe not so important, or maybe it is, but given those degrees and that background, I was trying to find where this led you into the tech industry, because I couldn't necessarily put that together. But I'd love to hear a little bit more of the origin as to how you got into the industry, and then to Dojo4 specifically.
Yeah, well, first of all, I'm glad that you got a good feeling from encountering this business. And that's definitely, again, I don't know if that's our an overt intention, but it's really important to us. Like, it's really important for us to feel good about how we are in our lives and how we are in our interactions and community, and to have a good sense of humor about things and that kind of thing. And that actually took us a while to get there, I think. And I'll talk a little bit about how I got involved in the tech industry and in this business. But when I first started, and this is like the very beginning of 2010, so been a little while now, I had all these ideas about what it is to be in business and what the tech industry does. And I think here in Boulder, it was like the beginning of Techstars. So for people who know about that, it's a accelerator that's funded a lot of startups in the tech industry, and so it was just a lot happening. Very moneyed industry, and I had this kind of idea about professionalism and what that looked like. And somewhere along the way, I realized that the very best possible thing that we could do for our business was to just actually be ourselves. And I know that sounds like it's like a vague thing to say. It's a cliche thing to say. Like, what does that actually mean? But I think for us, what that actually meant is like, we really show what we care about. We don't pretend to be something that we're not. That includes in terms of both our skills, but also like, we're kind of I'd say sometimes like a eccentric bunch. Sometimes when I meet a new client, I say, okay, so if we're on the, if there was a spectrum that went from like order to chaos, we would be like more over here, and that way we can have those conversations right away. And that might either put them at ease and they say, oh God, great, because we're kind of chaotic too, or we're kind of, anomalous or eccentric. And then we can kind of laugh about it and we become friends. And if they say, oh gosh, that makes me nervous, or, I really need a lot of process and I like things to be kind of like this, then we know right away, like they might be doing great work and we might be doing great work, but like, we're not actually a fit for each other. And so we're not actually going to be able to help each other. So it was like actually a business strategy to say, let's actually just present who we really are. We have like kids and dogs in our office, and like, I am never here early in the morning. And, just we're like real out about who we are. And that wasn't like, it wasn't accidental at a certain point. We became really intentional about it. So how did I end up in this kooky business? I would have never guessed in a million years that I would have been in the tech industry, let alone in business. Like, I really had an aversion to business, and I studied science in undergrad. I was actually born in Boulder, but grew up in Canada, and I studied science, biological sciences, and then did not end up doing that. Ended up working in documentary film in New York, and mostly like social issue documentaries in New York City. And I really thought like business was like, oof, like oh, it's like, it's like very masculine. It's very like manipulative, and it's oppressive, and it's creates inequities, and all these ideas that I had about business. This was also before the social impact movement, and so I had zero interest. Then through a bunch of sort of like family circumstances, I left New York. I came to Boulder, and this was during the 2008, 2009 economic depression, and especially in the entertainment industry, which was where I was, there was like no work, right? So I was just wandering the Rocky Mountains, wondering what to do with myself.
It's a good place to wander.
Could be worse, I guess. I think at the time I wished I was like wandering downtown Manhattan, but I happened to be here in the Rockies. And it was through a friend of a friend. There's huge tech boom happening at the same time that, all these other industries were really in a bad place. And, the story that I always tell is that I was sitting on my friend's porch having a glass of wine, and their neighbor came home at midnight, something like that. And I said, oh, I knew him. And I said, where are you coming from so late? And he's like, oh, I'm at work. And we're so busy. We just started this business building custom technology, and we're so busy. And I had been out of work, for far too many months. And, I had a glass of wine, and I said, oh, you should let me run that business for you. And he said, great, come in on Monday. And I was like, what? I don't know anything about technology. But I had also studied math. And I had done a lot of kind of more technological jobs in the film industry. So it wasn't totally foreign to me, but built software was really foreign. And then there I was, and I actually found it to be thoroughly fascinating. Like I had no idea, like I also entered into like a very interesting group of people. I learned a lot about kind of like the anarchist background of the internet and that kind of thing. And I learned a lot about like what it means, like how creative technology can be, that like, people think of it as these just sort of like mathematical lines of code. But like, as someone who had studied math for years, I knew how creative math is. And I felt really enlivened. And then weirdly, I fell in love with business. And now I feel like so passionate about it. I really feel like it's like one of those linchpins where you can actually make people's lives better, because it is one of those places where workplaces can make people's lives miserable. The way we work, what we do with that work, the impact of that work can be so difficult. So then the flip side of that coin is it can actually do the exact opposite, right? And so I'm really interested in like turning that and what it means to turn that and switch that, not just in operationally and actualizing it, but really in people's minds, like the same way that my mind was turned. I could turn people's minds and say, look, you can actually do work that you feel good about. You can actually do business in a way that's trustful. You can actually work with competitors in a collaborative way. You can actually regenerate your local economy and your relationships in the community all through business. And clearly I feel really strongly about it.
That's surely a common sentiment of a lot of the folks that we have on this podcast, is originally an aversion to business and not having imagined themselves be in business in any sort of degree, find themselves there for one reason or another. And I guess, change their tune at some point for varying reasons. But I'd be curious to know, Cory, was there a particular tipping point for you? Was there a point at which you did start to think about business and being in business differently, or was it just something that progressed over time and then you kind of realized like, oh, my positions or opinions have changed?
Yeah. I think it's a little bit of both. One thing that happened for me was that there was a lot of talk at that, sort of early on, 2010, 2011, in that area, 2012, around in the tech industry about the bubble, right? And, how much longer is this going to last? And as, we build custom technology, right? So if there's no startups building technology, then people don't need technology built. We don't just do startups. We also work with governments and nonprofits and all that kind of thing. But if people don't need technological products built, then we're out of business, right? So I'm starting to think how do we innovate? What's our niche? What do we do? And, how do we prepare for that so that we're not blindsided? And the thing that came to me and I didn't listen to it real strongly at first because it felt like maybe it was, now I think it's funny to call it idealism because it's really just so realism, but what I heard and didn't really listen to that strongly was the only thing that's not a bubble is the suffering that our world is experiencing, right? That is not going away. People are in pain. They are diminished by their circumstances. The environment is being plundered and the earth is ransacked and we don't know how it's going to, all the things that drive us around wanting to make positive change. And that was I could feel that voice talking. And I didn't listen at first because I thought, oh, that doesn't have anything to do with me, or that's too idealistic. And then I don't know if it was one day or if the voice just became too loud for me that I said, no, that's all there is basically. And it's not idealism. It's actually commercial practicality. If I want to stay in business and I want to, continue to employ people in this local community, and, we also work remotely, so broader, then I have to be addressing the problems that are not going to just go away when a bubble bursts. And those are the problems, climate change, social inequity, health, all these things that we're dealing with right now. And I put it out there and, from the converted, I think I wrote a blog post about it and then it got picked up. And I think, I don't know, who reads Triple Pundit anymore, but it got picked up and people read it and they were like, I think what I wrote was, the only growth industry is human suffering, which is, that's a little bit of a, I don't think I called it that, someone who writes big headlines wrote that, but, and so people who are already converted to that way of thinking were like, yes, exactly. My colleagues and, people in the tech industry here in Boulder were kind of like, oh, cute, a little bit, and I don't know if they took it super seriously. And I pushed, and then, slowly but surely, people would kind of start going like, oh, that's interesting. Or I think when we finally did when it finally turned over for us as a business was when we actually ran into a little bit of a perfect storm around for us as a small business where one of our clients went bankrupt and I think we lost one of our key people just he was moving away with his family to go, but his wife got a job somewhere. And, it was just sort of the business started to feel shaky and, and people started going oh, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? And that's when my business partner at the time was like, were you mentioning this thing about B Corp certification? That kind of thing. I was like, yes, I was, So it actually it came from a place of we can't just float the money, it's what I was saying about impermanence. It's easy to not think about that stuff when the money is just there and, you can always pay people. Yeah. But as soon as that starts to feel a little more ephemeral, I think people start thinking oh, what am I doing? What's important to me in my life? And what kind of work do I want to be doing in this world?
I love that as a place to lean into in a state of what seemed like, insecurities you described as a perfect storm, because you could see as it's just the same exact thing talking about the B Corporation certification for one. It doesn't change the B Corporation certification, but the way that you look at it in that, oh, that's excessive and that's not something that we should focus on right now because we're in this perfect storm, or the alternative of that, of like, no, this is exactly the thing that we should focus on right now because of the meaning that it has, as opposed to the very, I guess, superficial. It's this weird balance that exists just in business inherently, and then crossing into the sector of trying to blend business with meaning, which it seems that you've done very well, is that there's like subtle distinctions between what seems like kind of the frivolous pursuit of like money first. And it doesn't always look different, I guess. I think it could just be a different sense of intention and like what you're grounded in. So I just to appreciate that that's where y'all decided to lean into, as opposed to it could have gone a different direction.
And I think, I don't think that everyone I work with right away was like, oh, definitely that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
I think other people, and myself included, like, is this like, or am I just, am I barking up the wrong tree, or like, but then after a while, it's like, you just can't deny it in a way, like, it's like, oh, I'm going to just sort of like, I mean, clearly money, it's like, we know this in tech startups. Money does not make you happy. Like, it really is true. People are like, I'm just working on a quick exit, and they're so excited. And they're like, it's like all around us for years and years. People are just like selling their companies, making tons of money. And sure, there's like a little while where it's like, oh, and then I traveled the world for a year, or I was able to do this cool thing that I was never able to do before. And then there's like the come down, and, oh, right. Like that isn't, like, that doesn't make a good life. Right. And yeah, so then after time, I started feeling a lot of response from people of like, oh, you guys have been in business for a long time. And you're like, yeah, we're not it's like, we're not the most kind of like successful. We chose at one point, we're like, we don't want to grow anymore. We want to stay small. We have these small office, and we have, it's like, we say no to some jobs, and, that kind of thing. But people are like, oh, but you're still here. And you're like, I see you sitting out in front of the office with your, having a beer in the afternoon with your clients, and you seem happy, and I'm not saying it's easy all the time. Like, we all, being in business is always hard, but I'd say we're generally pretty happy, like, and feel good about, most of our choices of how we are. And I think I'd like to make that accessible to more people, because we are small. So one of the things that we're thinking about is like, how do we grow this cooperative without losing, what it has to offer people? And then this other piece, which is this antidote to tech piece that we're launching, how can we share our experience and continue to learn from others too?
I love that. And we'll touch on Antidote here in just a second, but I just can't let go of the audacity of you having a glass of wine, or maybe two at that point, and just having the courage to now run this tech agency. So I'm wondering, how does it feel now to be a decade plus in to running Dojo4? What's that like for you, especially with the context of where it all began?
Yeah, it's very surprising to me still, in a weird way, like, and then there was years, where I'd reach a point where I go like, really, this is what I want to be doing? Like, am I sure? And then I just like couldn't not do it. Right. So there's something deeply compelling to me about it. I think also for me, people are really important. I think for a lot of people, that's the case. And we have a really, really good group of people here. I really think of the people I work with as like some of the most important people in my life. And yeah, just very trusting, loving relationships. And yeah, so that feels really gratifying. I think, yeah, I just spent the weekend with some good friends of mine who I'd known from way back in the years that I was working on documentaries. And they that's the direction that they totally went. And they're doing real impact. Like, one of my friends, a few of them make these documentaries that really impact people. Right. And they're sort of laughing at me like, and you're doing this other thing that like we just don't understand. Like, you're using business to like do good stuff, or like what is that? And like technology, like what do you mean? Like things that I do on my phone, you know, it's like it's so different than, you know, what I intended to do. But I do think actually I feel really good about it. I feel like, you know, clearly technology, the way we interact with technology, how we build it, how much real estate it takes up in our lives is so it's so potent at this point in history, right? So I actually feel very grateful and fortunate to be what to me feels like this kind of epicenter of like potential real change, right? Because it's so much a part of people's lives. And, you know, just the fact that you and I can have this conversation thousands of miles away from each other almost seamlessly.
Yeah.
Like if we can use that kind of ingenuity to apply to, you know, I think that's a really great problem to solve, right? Is like how to keep people in good communication. And if we can use that ingenuity to apply it to all these other things that need that kind of thinking, it just feels so potent and so possible.
And so I guess we can start speaking to that. We've been hinting at it for the first initial period of our chat here. But Cory, I'd love for you to introduce us to this initiative that y'all are working on with Antidote to Tech. And then also, I think very pertinent is to like, why is it now that this has become a focus, 11, 12 or so years into Dojo4?
Yeah. I think it will help if I sort of give a little bit of the history, which is enmeshed with what you're saying, with the history of Dojo4. So, we're this small tech agency. We have a ground level office on this kind of tree-lined street. And right from the very beginning, it was a little bit of a community hangout. You know, people would come by. We're in a small town. People know each other. We're ground level. We have these kind of like outdoor seating on this nice street, and developers would come by. And we actually had sort of this open door policy right from the very beginning, because the first few weeks that we were open, it was actually started as, it was before co-working was like really a thing, but we were like, and it was actually right before I was involved. So people then were like, we'll just have a space where like developers and designers can work together and we can collaborate. And within like 2 or 3 weeks of opening the doors, it was like people are coming through the doors saying, can I hire a team of people to build me this thing? So then very quickly became an agency. But because the ethos was there from the beginning, we just had this open door policy. Amazingly, still the case. We just have friends of friends, people, family members come and work out of our office. So it's always been kind of open. We, share the space with our community. What that meant was that we often we were sort of the center of, or at least a part of conversations. I don't know if we're the center, but it would feel like that sometimes. That, people would sort of gather, you have a beer at the end of the day, people come after work, that kind of thing. And one of the conversations that kept on coming up, right for as long as I was involved, and, it was sort of this theme was, it's so nice to be here. It's so nice to actually sit down with you guys, talk about our work, talk about the parts of it that are meaningful from like, get into like the problem solving aspects of building technology, and to like really just be in connection with my community. And then that led to this kind of, like there's a lot of depression and anxiety in the developer community, and people feel really isolated. They feel really lonely. And sort of a little bit of a sense of like, I don't know if a little bit, actually a lot of a sense of meaninglessness. Like, okay, it's really fun when I'm talking to my other, people I know in the developer community about like problem solving and, using open source to like build upon things together and collaborate and blah, blah, blah. But like when I'm at work, I'm like in a cubicle, or I'm building this thing that I like don't really care about, or like this thing actually I think is like not that great, but I don't really have any control of it. And then just feeling like essentially more and more alienated. And for me, as someone who was not a developer, but, sort of intimately involved in the community, the thing that really struck me was that it's a highly intelligent community, right? Like these are people that really have a lot of brain capacity, especially for problem solving, right? Like it's that kind of brain that then is attracted to writing code. And that this incredible brain capacity and these like genius minds were being used to build an internet that was like completely meaningless to them and not fulfilling. Like they were pouring their skills, their intellect into these products that like they essentially didn't really care about and didn't really oftentimes have a lot of control around, like, well, I wouldn't really build it that way. Well, marketing says you have to build it that way, kind of thing. And for me, it was like very obvious, like, well, of course you're depressed. Of course you have anxiety. Of course you don't feel like, connected with people because you're just like, it's about capitalist value extraction based on, perceived market pressures. And then developers are kind of these cogs. Now, I'm not saying that all developers are stuck in this way, but there's definitely a theme there. And really like a huge, like a wave of, I hesitate to use the word epidemic, but an epidemic of depression and anxiety in that community. So, and then we started to like have that conversation with people, and it was like, yes. And people would say, like this kind of recognition, like, yes, when you say that, that just is like, it resonates so deeply for me. And I feel like, I just feel so lonely. And I didn't know that other people had this feeling, right? So then for years we would talk about like, well, what should we do? Should we like have conferences where people can talk about this stuff? Should we just write about it and see if that's helpful? That kind of thing. Meanwhile, we're running a business. So, anything extraneous starts to feel like, yeah, that sounds great. We'll get to it, after this project or next year or whatever. So still having those conversations, but, it's like not pivoting our time and energy entirely in a way that we may have liked to. And kind of exploring this and really supporting our community. Then during this last year in 2020, during the pandemic, when it was like, we very luckily were able to stay in business. We had, great clients that were also lucky to be able to stay in business, but it was like a lot quieter, as I imagine it was, for a lot of people. And so I also started to notice that kind of like what was important to us was really, would come to the surface more. Just because of like the general buzz was like a little lower. Yeah. And this really came up again, this theme of kind of what is meaningful to us in our work? How can we support our community to do meaningful work, to feel in community? And the more we talked about it, just sort of within our closer, in my colleague group and, people in our closer community, we realized that like there's lots of things we could do about it. But we knew that for us, for instance, for most of us living in Colorado, like the pandemic had this kind of, it was very scary and, just so much suffering. On the other hand, we all had like these incredible mountains that I could go out into the mountains every day. And, we live in this very like outdoorsy place, right? So there's a lot of just like engagement with nature, which, we would talk about, it's like very healing, right? And we know this. And even though we were all isolated in our own houses and, mediated by these screens, that we felt like, oh, but at least we have we have some sense of community that we had like really invested, our social capital was really strong so that when we had to draw on that bank during the pandemic, the savings were there. Our social capital, we had really built it up, right? And for us, it felt like that was really what has helped us feel like strong, safe, we can do meaningful work, that kind of thing. And so we thought, okay, that's not the way it is for everyone. Maybe they won't, but we know that those two things are true. Being in nature is an antidote to this feeling of kind of alienation around
Yeah.
an internet that is not ours, like that we don't, feel products that we may be making for the internet that we do not feel are edifying at best, and at worst are actually damaging. And being in nature, understanding our place in the natural ecology, and the other one is being in genuine human connection with others. And we just know this from our own personal experience. And so we were talking about that, and I think one day someone used this word, like, it's an antidote to these feelings of alienation. And I thought, you know what? Maybe we'll do conferences, maybe we'll do whatever, maybe we'll just continue to have conversations on the porch. But at least we could just put this out there and then just see if this resonates for people, allow people to be part of these conversations in a bigger way. We're really committed to this stuff and acknowledging how important it is to engage in these ways, to take care of ourselves. And maybe we can plant a little seed and at least let people know there's other people that are thinking this way. So that's why we started Antidote to Tech.
I mean, I would say right from the beginning, these antidotes, I think, resonate with people inside tech or just people who use technology in their lives. I surely know the good value of a hike when my anxiety is high or my stress is high. It does certainly feel like something that is almost medicinal, to be outside for those few hours in fresh air. Cory, are you familiar with the book Player Piano by Kurt Vonnegut by chance?
No, I love Kurt Vonnegut, but I never read that one.
I feel as if this is exactly, and when I first read that initial landing page, the list of commitments and the antidotes on Antidote to Tech's landing page, it connected me to this book because the premise is that we're in this United States that's been completely optimized for the sake of efficiency. I mean, everything that we've created, we've attempted to alleviate any inconvenience from our lives. And so it's this dystopian kind of future of we've optimized for what, at what point, because there's inevitably binds between that of what is actually meaningful and what isn't. Are these things that we think are inconvenient or convenient? Are they not? And I oftentimes think that about, what sort of tech I'm engaging with personally, not being someone who builds it myself. But I think the same thing. I'm what is the purpose of that? What is the use of that? And then inevitably having friends inside the industry too, think about, them and what it is that they're building and what connection they feel to those things in particular. And so I'd be interested here. Of course, there's those antidotes, and I think you've described a couple of those in practice with the community that it seems y'all build very locally, and as well, just the practice of getting outside. I'm wondering what this looks like from Dojo4's perspective as a tech agency. How, at the top of our episode, you mentioned pursuing meaningful work, and I'd love to hear what exactly that looks like for y'all in practice, perhaps.
Yeah, I feel like that's the pith of it, right? Because it's really easy to say meaningful work. And I love what you were saying about Player Piano.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a good book? Yeah, I wrote it down here. Just that this kind of dystopian separation from what actually makes us human, right? Is it's so poignant. And I think that is actually where we've gotten to in terms of what it means to do meaningful work. So I think there's this idea about meaningful work is something that has a direct product impact that is, directly helpful to another human being or directly helpful to the environment. And that is definitely, I think that can feel very meaningful, and it's really good that that's happening in the world, right? We're finding ways to make sure, hopefully better and better, make sure that people who don't have enough food are getting enough food. People who need access to clean energy can have access to clean energy. Taking, dirty energy and making it clean, all these things, that the point of the business is actually these direct impacts, right? But then there's this whole other swath that is also making impact. And now I know I'm sort of equating impact with meaning, and those are not the same things, but I want to draw out that they're like siblings, right? Because I think in the end, people, they feel good when they're in service. That's something, and maybe that's also based on my Buddhist background. Like there's a very famous Buddhist philosopher named Shantideva. He says, if you want to be miserable, think of yourself. And if you want to be happy, you think of others. And so I think, I definitely draw that, but most people in the world know that this is true. Like when you see other people, that something you've done brings other people joy, it brings you so much more joy than like getting to eat all the cake yourself, that kind of thing. So in that way, I think impact and meaning go hand in hand, because meaning is something that's like, it touches you on a personal level. So, here I am saying that, we had this idea, like we're going to turn Dojo4 and we're going to only work with impact clients. And that's going to make us feel like we're doing meaningful work. So we're only going to work with clients that are addressing hunger, poverty, social justice, climate change, blah, blah, blah. And we realized like pretty quickly, actually, that actually wasn't enough, right? Or not that it wasn't enough, but it wasn't a one-to-one equation that then that work was going to feel meaningful to us.
Yeah.
Like they go hand in hand, but like actually maybe it's not a good fit for the other reasons I was saying. Like it's not a good personality fit, or like for us as technologists, it's like the work they're doing is super cool, but like the stack they're using, like the technology stack they're using is like so boring or so outdated or whatever. And then we also realized like, yeah, and sometimes like we just want to like something that feels meaningful to us might be something that's like, it doesn't have like a huge impact, but it has like a community impact. Like it's like we're, creating art in a way that like feels like it's enriching our community. Or, like I work with people who, are cyclists and they like love cycling, right? So that's not making a huge impact, but it feels personally meaningful to them. So we've been sort of grappling with this, like, you can't really make a policy about what feels meaningful because it's personal. And then this other piece that I feel like almost evangelistic about, which is that anyone can do meaningful work and anyone can make impact that way. So I think people think like, oh, that's nice that you can talk about all this B Corps stuff and talk about meaningful work and talk about impact. But like I run I'm making this up now, like a janitorial service company. How am I going to do that? And the thing that I've learned over all this time is that you can do it with anything, right? You can run your janitorial service business by, having the workers there feel so respected and so seen and so cared for. You can, try to, use environmentally sustainable cleaning products. You can build ties in your community that help you give back to that community. You could do this with an insurance company. You could do it with like a, basketball equipment manufacturing company. I'm just trying to think of something where people think like, oh no, that has nothing to do. I can't quit my job and go do like a, bleeding heart, do-gooder kind of thing. I want to do meaningful work, but like, I can't do that. And I don't think that's true. I think you can do it with anything. You can do it by like, in any possible way. So that's also like ties in for us around helping technologists see that. Like you don't necessarily have to, it's like if your family relies on you for income, which for, most adults now, that's the case, right? You don't necessarily have to quit your job in the place where you don't it's like where you work in a cubicle and you don't feel good. It's like you can do, and maybe you can't even go into nature, but you can open your window and you can feel the breeze. You can remember that you're part of this world. You can use your sense perceptions to go, because that's what works for us in nature. It's like our sense perceptions open, right? Like we go, oh, look at that big sky, and like feel that breeze, and like smell that, air, and feel my feet on the ground and that kind of thing. And you can do that whether or not you're in like a national park, or if you're actually in a cubicle and you just kind of go like, I'm just going to imagine the window being open, right? And that actually works, right? So you can find meaning even if you're trapped in other ways. And you can remember that it's really important to be in connection with other humans. And then so you don't have to feel like my choices are either I'm going to like change the world and, break my chains and change the world, or like I'm just stuck in this shitty life with no meaning. It's like you can take your life as it is right now and make impact in your personal life by finding meaning. Now, those antidotes that I'm talking about might not be the ones for you, but we know, we've tried a few and we know those two work for us. So that's why we're offering them.
They're very all encompassing too. Being outside and connecting with others. Those are quite broad prescriptions, which I think is perhaps for the best. But it seems as if, this kind of all connects back to the sense of mindfulness and attentiveness for me, in that, you have this idea of meaning, and especially in the kind of communities of business that, we frequent, you imagine that it has to look a particular way, as opposed to being very attentive and kind of attuned to what feels a particular way for you. Do you feel that those things are meaningful, and having that kind of presence of mind to always, it's easy to escape and kind of lose track of, that sense of awareness, but tying back to that every now and again and reflecting on that point of like, okay, is what I'm doing meaningful, or am I feeling pressure from what I think, meaningful work looks like, if that's quitting my job and, whatever it might be. It seems very important to have that attentiveness, to pay attention to what are expectations versus what's actually, true in your own experience.
Yeah. And I think, like you're saying, those things are really broad, but they're actually purposely that broad because it's almost like they're like secrets in plain sight or something like that. And it's like exactly what you're saying. Like, how can I touch in with what makes things feel meaningful to me? It's like, you have to have something to touch into. Right. And so I think that's all we're saying is like, these things are available to all of us all the time. Like we can always sort of feel where we are in our own, where do we fit in our natural world? Even if you're like in a city, it's like you're still experiencing the seasons or, whatever it is. And even if you don't know that many people, or you're just like, you don't know anybody, but you can like use it on your subway ride or something. And you can just feel like this is humanity, right? These are other human beings with a similar experience to me. They also, wake up in the morning. They also feel lonely. They also feel joy. And even that is genuine human connection. Even if it's, it's like, maybe you have no one to have a beer with. You just move somewhere, but you can still go, oh, that person in the grocery store is also shopping by themselves. And then you just acknowledge it in your mind. And just those practices, either being with people or, psychologically or socially, being, connecting with our natural environment in one way or another, that in itself gives us, like, that doesn't create the meaningful work, but it gives us the tools that we need in order to either decide to do meaningful work or turn the work that we're doing into meaningful work somehow ourselves.
Right. It brings you back to some sense of being grounded,
Exactly.
which is certainly critical for making decisions of any kind.
Yeah. And
so,
we think that actually if people were like this more, it would change the way the internet was built, right? So that's why one of the reasons it's really important to us is because it's like, we're in this kind of interesting place where people are starting to realize like, oh, users of the internet are being screwed, right? Like we're being used for our data, we're being used for our attention, we're being used for, our consumerism, we're being used for all these reasons and in all these ways. And it's so interesting. And it's so kind of like, tantalizing and scary that, but we're like, it's exciting that we're starting to see this and it's out, it's like if people have seen The Social Dilemma and the work that Center for Humane Technology is doing, like people are starting to go like, right, like big tech doesn't necessarily have my best interest in mind. And that's like looking at this kind of ethical layer of like how we're building the internet. I think another organization is called All Tech is Human. They're looking at responsible tech. Then there's like, I think it's called the Algorithmic Justice League, and they do that work as well. Really interesting work. But one thing that's not being looked at that much is like the experience of the people who are actually building the internet. So the human producers. So not just the users, but like how, what about the people that are not the like, big bad business, but like just you and me, normal people building the internet. And if they felt more in tune with themselves and their surroundings and their community, it would be much more difficult to build an internet that was so bad for users.
You kind of anticipated my next question, but I'd love to have you expound a bit further on it. If these antidotes are adopted with greater implementation across the industry, what do you anticipate for the future of technology, the industry, and perhaps what it is the technology that we use on a day-to-day basis? What are some of your hopes and aspirations, I guess?
Yeah. Like the dream. I don't know exactly. I mean, I think it would be a little bit in line with a campaign, a manifesto that is definitely in line and, that we admire a lot, called the Sustainable Web Manifesto. And they point out, they get similar to Antidote to Tech. They're saying, put your name on this, let people know that you care and that you're committed to these things. And I think their whole thing is like, we can build an internet that is clean, that is resilient, that is regenerative, that is open, that is inclusive. All of these things. I think there's actually 8, and I maybe only just said 5, but you can look it up, Sustainable Web Manifesto. And I think that's where I would see technology going, is in all of those directions. A place where, it's like one of my colleagues was just mentioning to me recently that they had, for a long time, they weren't cognizant of the environmental impact of their work, because it's like, as a developer, you're just writing these lines of code. You're not like, it'd be different if you were like, like mining physically in the earth, and then like, or like driving a dump truck and then like dumping a bunch of trash in the ocean, right? Like you would see, this is
right.
what I'm doing. This is the impact of my work. With the developers, it's not the same. And, it's like, you're like, oh, I write these lines of code, and then maybe you see the product, but you don't necessarily know, like what are, when the scales, what happens. And let's say you're asked to build something that, stores images. Okay. Images take up a lot of server space, and they're supposed to store images forever, right? Like I'm building, this photo app thing. It's going to store images at high resolution forever. That is an incredible amount of server space, and server space has a huge environmental footprint. So I think like Greenpeace, I just saw somewhere that Greenpeace was saying that they predict that by 2025, that 20% of the world's electricity load will be cloud computing, will be server space. And that is huge. So, unless we've like completely converted to wind and solar by then, in the next 3 years, like that's a huge environmental impact, and so like our developers are starting to feel like, oh God, like, what am I doing? Like, I can't keep doing this. This is like, I'm gonna, I'm contributing to like the demise of our planet. So this is all to say that my wish would be that if we feel more of a connection to our, where we are in our natural ecology and to other human beings that we live with on this planet, that you can't not see those things, right? Like, stop being able to not, stop being able to ignore our inseparability from one and each other and our interdependence on one another. And from there, it's like you just make different choices. So when your, product owner or project manager says, oh, build this, you just go, no, like, I can't. And then you say, but I have a brilliant mind and I've come up with a different solution, right? And then the company goes, wow, that's great. Like, why don't we pivot our business? Being a little like simplistic, but you see where I'm going with this.
Right. Yeah. And so to me, it seems like a no-brainer of things that we'd love to have adopted by folks within the tech industry, as well people just, using technology. There's so many points there of things that were interesting to me of working on the internet for some time and just being so grossly unaware to the environmental impact of that. Thankfully, it feels like that's really been a more present conversation for me in the last year or two, to where I'm like, wow, Corey, you really missing the boat on that.
Yeah, me too, definitely.
But I'm wondering, Corey, what if this seems like, and I imagine people listening to this think like, yeah, of course, like that is a vision for the future of technology that I'm bought into, make me feel better, if I'm one of the people who's responsible for building this tech, and ultimately the end users as well. Like, where do you think the barriers are to getting there, the resistances? Like, what are the challenges? Why aren't we there yet? Or why won't we get there fast enough?
Yeah. Yeah, I think one is knowing that it's possible, right? And feeling like there's enough of a critical mass of people that feel like it's possible. So that's one of the reasons why we're doing what we're doing with Antidote to Tech and, other things, is saying like, hey, we don't talk to each other maybe enough, or we're not, like out about our feelings about this. Let's be out about this. And then maybe we'll see like, oh, there already is a critical mass, or we will, contribute to a critical mass. I think that's one thing. I think another one is a little bit what we were talking about before in terms of people feeling like what's possible in their personal lives. So they think, sure, but like, I can't quit my job, or, like people are going to say I'm too idealistic and I just need to actually like pay back my college loans, or whatever. And so changing the story with that, like, no, you can make money and do good in the world, right? Like, that's, for instance, B Corp's whole thing, right? Like, nonprofits are such an important part of our economic ecology, but like our economic ecosystem, but like, that is not the only way to do it, right? Like, you can be an entrepreneur that, works on climate change and makes a good living, right? Like, that is completely possible. So changing the story, changing the game that way, and giving, sharing with each other best practices around like, how do you run a business that addresses real problems? And like, how do we use our problem solving skills to address those things that, are real problems, instead of feeling like I just need to work for another, company that's making shopping easier or whatever, like that kind of thing. Yeah. And then, I mean, those are the two barriers that really stick out for me. But yeah, I mean, I think that there's this one other piece that like, maybe it keeps that, like, I didn't know it was going to be such a theme in our conversation, but is like really caring for ourselves. So I think that like people don't care for themselves very much, it's like, because it's hard, like it's really hard, and it's like, and oftentimes it's associated with privilege. Like, yeah, that person can like care for themselves because they have the privilege and the access to the resources, but I think figuring out, tending to our own hearts and minds, and whatever that means, whether that just means like, it could just be like saying a nice thing to yourself, or not giving yourself a hard time, but I think it's like we say that, and I think there's this whole like thing about self-care, and that's not what I mean. I mean, it's like on a very fundamental level, just like believing that we are worthy of living a good life, and that we have something very worthwhile to contribute to this world. And just that, like, that little seed is such a barrier. We all contend with that. And I think, especially like we were talking about in the developer community, if you're isolated and you sit in a cubicle all day, it's really hard to feel that way sometimes, right? Like really, really hard. So it's like, it can feel insurmountable. And yet I think it's totally possible. And that little seed can have, if you can get over the barrier of like having that little seed, huge change can come from that.
I think that is an incredible point for us to wrap up on here, Corey. Thank you so much for taking the time here to share your origin story, and as well hear this very important conversation and initiative that is Antidote to Tech. And so I'd love for you to direct folks where should they best keep up with Antidote to Tech, Dojo4, and you and everything y'all are up to.
Yeah. Thanks, Corey. So we haven't officially launched Antidote to Tech yet, like in the big universal galaxy of, getting it out there, but towards the end of the summer. But I'm really glad to share it with people early, especially because we want feedback. Like this is a collaborative effort. So you can go to antidote2.tech, not the number 2, antidote2.tech, and put your name on there, share it with people. You can download the badge, or we're calling it a sigil, and put it on your site like you have done at Grow Ensemble, which I was so gratified to see that. Thank you. And share this and give us feedback. So there's a place to give feedback there, share resources. And hopefully we're already starting, maybe there's going to be like a little bit more of a community element. We're already getting that feedback. So as soon as that happens, if you put your name on there, or even just have a way for us to get in touch with you, which there's a form to fill out, then we'll be able to include you in that community aspect as well. If you're interested in Dojo4 or Dojo4.com, that's the number 4 in this case. And also, please feel free to reach out to me. Actually, personally, my email address is on the Dojo4 website, and these kind of conversations are what fuel me personally, and it's really important to me to be in touch with people personally. So please, for anyone that's listening to this, don't be shy.
Perfect. We'll have all things Dojo4, Antidote to Tech linked up at the show post at growensemble.com. Thank you so much, Corey.
Thanks, Corey. Such a pleasure.